Right. Welcome. Happy Merry Christmas. Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I have really been looking forward to this conversation with Jamison. We were at the Smash conference in Las Vegas in October, and he did this buyer's journey panel that I'm still going to write some articles about. I haven't done that, but this part of my Christmas project is to work on it, talking to 3 family members who helped move a loved one into a senior living community, how that worked. There were such amazing insights about stuff that we think that works so well and doesn't work at all. Or I at least didn't work for them. That's probably a fairer statement. And so after it was over, I went to James and I got to have you on Foresight TV. Here we are. But before we get started, this.
Hey guys, Steve Moran here.
So I hope I don't have total chaos here. As Jamison could see in the background, I had to step away for just a second and close the door and let a dog in, and there seemed to be some dog chaos going on. So I think that it will be okay, but I've got one dog laying here next to me. And it's just part of what life is like, right? Before we get started, I want to say thanks to KARE, who, with a K, that sponsors this. If you are struggling with staffing, you have shifts that you can't fill, and I know you do, KARE is the best way to fill those slots at a reasonable cost. Agency is crazy, stupid, expensive, and you often don't get the great people. And if you do get somebody great and you want to hire them, it costs you a fortune. If you work with KARE, the cost will be reasonable. It's just a small margin above what KARE pays them. And if you like them and you want to hire them, you can just do that. And there's no fee, no penalty. They'll love you rather than hate you. So I would really, really encourage you to talk to KARE about your staffing needs. Jamison, welcome. You've been around the industry for a long, long time. Am I not supposed to say that because it makes you sound old? I don't think so. But anyway, why don't we start by just sort of talk about who you are and what you're doing, and then we'll jump into the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And, I think I've known you for about the same amount of time I've been in the business. So, I've been I'd like to say in and around senior living for 20 years now. Started off at a small little company called Sunrise Senior Living back in 2003, and worked in their corporate communications team. They had just merged with Marriott Senior Living at the time, which, those that have been around a long time remember those folks. And worked my way around Sunrise in a variety of different roles, including marketing ultimately. Worked at the old trade association Alpha, which is now Argentum. Also served as a CMO at Holiday Retirement for a number of years, moving out to the West Coast. Also worked at Eclipse Senior Living for a couple of years in the middle of the pandemic, worked at G5 at the digital marketing agency, and decided I wanted to do a little bit of my own stuff for a little while. And so I've been consulting now for almost a couple of years, working with a lot of different operators on a variety of different marketing questions that they have in terms of aligning their marketing to produce better ROI for what they do. And I'm also working with some B2B companies that are serving the senior living business and helping them better understand how to attract interest in their products and services. So I love the senior living industry, as those that attended Smash learned while we were doing this research and producing what we ultimately showcased at the Smash conference. I was also going through the buyer journey at the same time with my mom and my sister for my grandmother, and moving her from Massachusetts to Florida, looking for an assisted living community, and going through all the trials and tribulations that are involved with the senior living buyer journey. So truly, it's a really interesting opportunity, I think, for our business to better understand the consumer perspective. Margaret Wild has been one of my mentors over the years, just all the great research that she has done to provide that consumer perspective. So I'm really excited and really excited that you were interested in this research, Steve, and that we could dive into it.
It's a really tough problem. I've been a consumer a couple of times for in one case for my mom, and helped with a couple of other family members. And I'd say once or twice a year, a friend who's outside the industry will call me. I think that what's interesting to me is that just maybe 2 months ago, I got a text message from somebody who's in the industry, and it was like at 6 o'clock in the morning saying, "Oh man, I'm looking for senior living for my mom and it sucks." And they just found that reaching out, and it's like, it's as if operators, salespeople don't really understand the buyer's journey very well, and understand perhaps the emotional trauma that family members go through. So where do we start on this? Let's start by talking about your panel and how this came about.
Sure. So, the panel conversation actually started based on the results of the research that we were finding. And, when Bailey Beacon, who oversees the SMASH conference, and I were talking about originally just a smaller session at a time during multiple other sessions were going on, we had talked about bringing in a panel, and I said, well, let's do some research, because I like the panel to respond to something and kind of add some colors to some information that we were finding. And then when we did the survey, pulled down the results, evaluated the results of the survey, we both said, wow, there's some really good information in here that we should really want to share with a lot more people. And that ultimately led to us doing the larger session at the end of the conference. And so the panelists that we pulled together were adult children who had just gone through the buyer journey in the past 6 months or to a year or so. They had reflected on what they had endured going through the buyer journey. A lot of positives, but also some negatives that we explored as part of the session that we hosted with them. And that, Steve, one of the things that I think, in my one-on-one conversations with each of the panelists before we actually did the session, one of the things that they all seemed to think through was that none of them really had a lot of experience with buying senior living previously. One of them had, in terms of ultimately having to move their mother out of an assisted living community on the East Coast and moving them to the West Coast after their father had passed away. But the rest of them hadn't. And so everyone seems to enter the senior living buyer journey fresh. And let's remember that if you had no experience in looking for senior living, it's kind of to your point earlier, like there's a lot of emotion already involved with it, and they're going into a buyer journey that they have no experience going into before. Because it's not like buying a car, it's not like buying insurance, it's not like buying, an airline ticket or reserving a hotel room. It's a very different buying experience. Add into it all the emotion that comes with it, and the family dynamics that comes with it. And, I think when people have to go through the buyer journey and they experience the obstacles that they encountered, it just makes it that much more important for us as marketers in the senior living business to address those obstacles.
Okay, so let's actually talk about your research and kind of some of the things that you came up with. And I'm going to sort of turn that over to you. Is where do we start?
Yeah, so the research starts really in what I would say is the middle of the buyer journey. So they are now at a point where they are ready to select or put together a list of senior living communities that they want to explore more and go out and most likely visit. So they've already somewhat made the decision that they want to go down the path of finding a senior living community. So the higher end of the buyer journey, which we did not explore, and this is an important point, we didn't explore the part where people are learning about what senior living is and all that sort of stuff. And I think there could be a lot of research that goes on that front. But because, and I make this point in some of the articles that I've posted on LinkedIn very clear, that they are searching and selecting senior living communities as part of this experience. So some of the things that we explored as part of the research include, how did you put your list together? What sources of media did you reference in terms of looking for specific senior living communities that you wanted to learn more about? And so no surprise, right? Digital marketing and is one of the top sources of media that they reference, right? They go to Google, they find a Google business profile, they're learning more information, they see reviews and all that sort of stuff. And they're also getting personal referrals. So they're talking with people, they're trying to understand. I think we had said that about 46% of the participants of the survey were going out to friends and family and just trying to understand what path that they are about to go down had their friends or family already experienced and what guidance they could provide in terms of a specific community. Once they kind of get that color and that feedback, they're then going on to the web, Google most likely, and other places too, to try and find more information. Which communities are close to them? Where are what are the communities offering? And then once they've gone through putting together an initial list, they might be visiting websites. They might be looking at your community-specific websites. They might be looking at reviews on other review-specific websites like Yelp. And then they're picking up the phone and calling or sending in a form to learn more, get more information, and or to book a tour to come out and visit the community. And so that was kind of the initial phase of what we were looking at. And then the research went further to look at specific forms of media. How valuable was social media? How valuable were the community websites? How valuable to you were review sites? And then we went a step further than that and said, okay, did you tour? And if you toured, how would you rate the best tour that you had? Which, fortunately, they rated them pretty highly. And then beyond that, did they actually move into a senior living community? And if they did move into a senior living community, what factors prompted them? Which the factors prompting them ultimately, when we were looking at that information, didn't really surprise us. Location is we've known for years about location, but I always like to say, like, we seem to think we know that from a marketing perspective, but having the consumer perspective data to back it up just reinforces that if we're putting dollars or resources into things like, building, locating communities in the right parts of town or whatever it might be, that the location is a very critical point in that. So we went all the way through the buyer journey. And the last question we had asked as part of the survey was, based on all that you went through as part of the buyer journey, would you refer friends and family to look at senior living communities as an option for an aging loved one? And, again, the vast majority, about 75%, said we would. So I think that says a lot about the work that we do, but there are certainly obstacles that need to be addressed as part of that buyer journey to reduce the friction that we, for whatever reason, put in place and to make the experience a little bumpy along the way.
So one of the things that I've observed, and I'd love to have your feedback as to whether or not it's consistent. I've talked to, I'm thinking probably a dozen people who are inside the industry who walked through this job buyer's journey. Mm-hmm. And I would tell you that in virtually every case, people have been pretty unhappy with the journey. Mm-hmm. And yet, when I talk to people overall, I just sort of stumble across people who've chosen senior living who are not inside the industry. They come at it from the first time. While they certainly, it's not been necessarily the smoothest road possible, mostly they're pretty happy with the experience. And so I'm wondering if sometimes we're too hard on ourselves.
I would say, I think we are hard on ourselves in many ways, but we should be hard on ourselves. We should always be looking at ways to improve our business and in how can we make it better for the consumer. We often talk about how senior living is 10 years behind other industries, multifamily, hospitality, many others. And it's like, I think there's an earnest desire to improve the experiences in both from a product standpoint, from a promotional standpoint, other standpoints. But it's just, it requires us to really focus in on various concepts like experiential marketing to make it better. One of the articles that I did that focused in on, kind of the experience as part of, when people are calling or sending in forms and, we're not getting back to people in 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is. Yeah, that can be a problem. From our perspective, we expect people to pick up the phone, answer it, have a good conversation with a potential prospect, encourage them to come in for a tour, all those sorts of good things that we've been training people on for years. And when they don't pick up the phone immediately, that at the very least, they're calling back within, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it might be, the standards that are put in place. And, Primo Solutions did a nice little mystery shop where they showed that we probably could be doing better there. When I asked the consumer about it, they're just like, yeah, if I hear back in a day or two, that seems reasonable to me. It's like they're trying to put together their lists, and, a day or two seems fine to them, not like 5 minutes later, which 5 minutes later might be great, or the consumer might not be available at that time. But it's kind of like a give and take, right? From a consumer perspective, if you don't get back to me within a day, I might already be touring by the time you get back to me, which one of the panelists was. And so you just by not responding in a timely way, the consumer might not see your lack of speed as important to them because they're already out touring, looking at places and starting to make decisions. And so that's why I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get back to the consumer quickly, even though the consumer doesn't necessarily think, hey, you need to get back to me in 5 minutes on this thing. So I think that's an important, to your point,
yeah,
an important thing.
So if you're the only person they're talking to, probably the speed to lead is not as important as we might think it is, except the problem is if somebody else is faster, or that just potentially puts you at a disadvantage. How many buildings did most people take a look at, or communities most people take a look at?
So I had one panelist that had only looked at one community, and he had a list of 4, but he ultimately, the first one they visited, they fell in love with, from a product standpoint, from a people standpoint, and they just fell in love with it. All the way through another panelist that looked at 15 communities, and she actually toured 15 communities. And in Las Vegas, I know they have a lot of communities there. I didn't realize there were that many that you could actually tour, but she took the time. She went to 15 of them. She remembered what were pros and what were cons. It all boiled down to people. For a lot of the panelists, and even going through our survey, how important the relationship was when they walked into the building, and what they observed from the residents, and what they observed from the staff, and how the staff may have engaged with them beyond just the salesperson. And after, post buyer, like what or post buying, when we look at that world, if what I sensed was the buyer's remorse, which if there was any buyer's remorse, which for those 3 panelists, there was no buyer's remorse. We did have a 4th person who unfortunately couldn't make the panel, but that person was dealing with some post-buying issues after they had bought into a community. Mom moved in, and there was staff turnover and all those sorts of things, and they were now having a lot of issues. And so that whole experience with the people in the community, and not just staff, but also the other residents, is critically important as part of the buying experience, because people are tuning into, like, is this friendly? Is this a friendly place? And how does that feel to people as part of the buying process?
So this is really fascinating to me, because we as operators spend a lot of time talking about, one of the big topics, as you know, is what are boomers going to want? And when it really, if you were to do a deep dive into that, what's really going through people's heads, I think, is what kind of building should I build? And yet what I'm hearing you say is that the building wasn't that important, that it was the people. Is that fair?
That is very fair. And should the building look nice? One of the panelists was an interior designer previously in her career. So it is nice that they have good looking, clean, safe, friendly, fun buildings that are modern in some ways. That was an important thing. The street appeal sells, so to say, to get you into the building ultimately. But once you kind of peel back the that piece of it, the aesthetics of the community, people are now looking at, okay, how is the staff people treating me? How are they making me feel? And as they're touring through the community, is it feeling rushed? Is it feeling just very process oriented, or is the salesperson really taking the time to understand me as a consumer, as well as taking the time to introduce the people who will ultimately be serving or caring for mom or dad. And so that is the people piece of it is critically important as part of the buying experience. And we've known on the resident experience how important people are and the impact of turnover. And let me tell you, the panelists see turnover in the communities. Like all three of them saw when turnover happened. They sometimes felt when it might happen. But good communities seem to be able to bounce back very quickly from a beloved team member, leaving the community, and others sometimes struggle with that. And so that people component and how we look at that and how we might help our staff as bringing them into the overall buyer journey as well, I think is critically important, from the care manager and the maintenance people all the way through to the chef and the dining staff, all the way through to your management team at the community.
So I've had the best tour I've ever had was a Sunrise building about 5 miles from my house. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was writing about communities. I try to do a tour every week and write about it. And I came to Sunday and I needed this article for Monday. And so I found a place I hadn't been to. Maintenance supervisor who gave me the tour because I don't know why, no salesperson available. It was the best tour I ever got. And the reason it was best was because it took us an hour. And the reason it took us an hour was because she knew everybody and she had to stop and meet them and introduce me. And it was a wonderful, wonderful, it was like, if I needed a place, this would be it. Mm-hmm. So as you're working with communities and sort of thinking about how to train, not just salespeople, but operational people as well, what do you teach them? What do you talk about in terms of how to make that people experience terrific?
Well, I think you have to start with your core values of what do you as an operator believe in, and then kind of work from there, because those core values and your mission and your beliefs and that sort of thing are going to start feeding into your differentiators. What makes you different as an operator. And it's funny, all the surveys that I've done over the years, whether it's at the Trade Association or G5, that reflected a lot of different perspectives of senior living operators, they all say their people make the difference. And
right.
And then when you try to push more, well, they're caring hearts, all those sorts of statements that we've made over the years. And that's fine. But then the question becomes, how do you differentiate? Because everyone says they hire with heart and all those sorts of fuzzy things. How do you get beyond that? Like, how do you take those serving hearts and differentiate a little bit further as part of the experience that you're going to offer, both from the sales perspective all the way through to move-in? And I think in many ways, Steve, it's training. And I don't want to say training like, well, you will do this and this is the process. And there's going to be a little bit of process, but I think the process serves as flexible guardrails to allow the people that you're hiring to understand, like, we want to welcome people into our communities and we want them to be able to move into the communities, and then taking those guardrails and allowing them to work within it to be able to be themselves and to be able to showcase their personalities and the type of people that we hire for our communities to be excellent in the care and service that we offer.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that maybe gets missed is there's not enough time spent introducing prospects to other residents and other team members. Mm-hmm. I've done 3 tours in the last 4 weeks. One of them was a tour where I was not very disclosing about why I was there. And the salesperson who gave me the tour was really unhappy with me. She expressed like 3 times that she was unhappy that I wouldn't give her more information. Mm-hmm. And I wrote about it so you can see it on the blog. But I left the building very unsettled and not in love with this very beautiful building. And I know the leadership of this team of this organization fairly well. It doesn't reflect it, but as I've spent more time thinking about it, I think that what I really came away with was that she had written me off. I mean, she'd written me off because her view of me was not as a person, but as money, revenue, a sale. And I would say, maybe there's some corporate pressure on this building. It's a year old and it's only about 50% full. So, but you can't let that happen.
Right. Because who's to say that you may not have been looking for yourself or for a loved one, but ultimately you're going to be talking with people who might come to you and say, hey, do you have any recommendations for communities in the area? And if you had a bad experience at that community with that specific person and that person's still there, maybe she was having an off day or whatever it is, but still you're going to have a perspective now that with word of mouth, you're going to share if asked or maybe if not asked. And so I think that goes back to one of the critical things that we've been talking about in our business a long time, which is we need to be treating every lead, every prospect as gold, right? Like, regardless of whether they came in from a place from mom or from newspaper or from digital or personal referral, each one needs to be treated as gold, especially if they're taking their valuable time during probably a potentially emotional time for them to come into your community, visit with it, seek to understand if it's the right community for them and their loved one. And frankly, that's what we're paying salespeople to do. And if we can't do that, and to juxtapose that experience next to the one where the maintenance director was giving you a fantastic tour, do we need salespeople in our buildings? And that's a question multifamily is actually asking a lot right now. And how you manage that more successfully and equip people or resource communities in a different way that allows them to be able to handle the sales piece at the local level. And then maybe you have a regional salesperson that's providing the guidance, the counsel to the rest of the team. So a lot of ways to get to, I think, where a lot of operators want to go. I don't think we're quite there as a business yet to eliminate sales from every single community, but I do know other industries are looking at it, at least, how you can better align resources across a broader group of communities. So,
well, I will tell you that back in the olden days, when I lived in Southern, my wife ran an assisted living building. And it was 130, 150 units. They didn't have a salesperson. Yeah. She and the office manager did all the sales. Now they had a fairly streamlined corporate reporting process, so she didn't have to spend a lot of time working on budgets and meetings and those kinds of things. Sort of family owned, but she was they stayed full. I kind of think that at least once you've got a building full, that often maybe salesperson, you probably still need a move-in coordinator because the paperwork and it's gotten a lot more complex, and I probably just made a whole bunch of people mad here now. So we've got only a little bit of time left. One of the questions I really want to hit is, how did people find these buildings? Because there are two, I'm going to tell you the two things that I found really fascinating. The first one was, and we alluded to it earlier, was that as consumers, they were pretty comfortable with the fact that they were run by human beings, and that everything didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be good enough. And so they were a lot more tolerant in terms of saying, yeah, some of the meals aren't so good, but that's not that big a deal. The second thing is that I was blown away by the panelists who said they didn't remember getting anything in the mail. It was all digital, and not even any, as I recall on the panelists, not even any digital ads, right? Can you talk about those two things?
Yeah, and so, the panelists themselves, so when we did the research, one of the questions we asked was, which items from a list below prompted you to learn more about a specific senior living community? And so, 47% said friend and family recommendations. And so I need senior living. I want to know from people that have already gone through that experience how it was. Would you recommend anything? Professional referrals came in at 19%. And I think professional referrals was an interesting one, Steve, because the professional referrals, partially from their own experiences with communities, but partially and probably more so, is their patients and their clients, whether it's a healthcare provider or personal finance person or a realtor, whatever it is, they're hearing feedback from people that have moved into senior living communities or have looked at senior living communities. So they're processing whether they even have experience with the communities directly. They're hearing from their patients and their clients of what's going on at these senior living communities. So, one of our panelists talked with their mom's doctor just to kind of get them. And the doctor's like, well, these are the ones I've heard about. This is the pros. These are the cons I've heard about. You might still want to look at some of the communities where there might have been cons that might fit better for you. But this is what I heard from my patients and my clients. So the whole grassroots marketing aspect, so the personal referrals and professional referrals, made up what we're saying, 66% of how people were going about communities. Now, I think it's important for us to pause there for a second, Steve, because digital marketing, we know people are going to Google or Google business profiles or whatever it might be to actually find communities, look at them online. I think what when you think about the world of lead source attribution, like it always is very specific. It's like last touch, first touch, whatever it might be. And we don't think about how many touches are happening along the buyer journey to prompt somebody to a specific community. So like you said, somebody said, hey, I never saw anything in the mail. I never, you're wasting your money if you're doing newspaper ads. A lot of that media, especially traditional media, is a lot of top of funnel stuff. It's starting the prompting phase, starting people to think about it. And they might not even remember having seen a newspaper ad or a direct mail piece, but it may have put a seed in their head to start thinking about senior living for their mom or their dad. And so, I would not necessarily say you're wasting money if you're doing traditional media, but like one of the panelists said, hey, I see the trial attorneys out there posting ads all over the place, especially in Las Vegas, I guess, for, to call this number. And I see the same guy all over the place. I could tell you who he is, sort of thing. Whereas with senior living, no, because I think oftentimes in senior living, we say, oh, we did 2 newspaper ads. We didn't get any leads from it. So we're not going to do that again. Whereas if you're going to do traditional media, you've got to use the science of reach and frequency to just continuously educate people and build brand awareness and those sorts of things. Now, should you be spending boatloads of money on it? Probably not. But it's a way for us to constantly feed and direct people to your online experience, which ultimately is the thing that gets coded into the CRM to say, hey, Google sent me, or my website sent me, or digital advertising sent me. When there's all this activity going on well before people are searching and selecting, they're just hearing and feeling and that sort of stuff. They're getting prompted. Because I would also say the panelists said, all 3 of them, even though they got personal referrals and professional referrals, they still went online. And when they went online and called the phone number or submitted a form, what happens is the CRM attributes that to website or to digital marketing, right? And so, okay, well, I guess the newspaper isn't working. Let's shut that off. So my recommendation is always test as much as you can. And see what's going to work as part of your promotional mix and what's not. We got to constantly be rejiggering our promotional mix and what sources of media we give resources to. But yeah, I would definitely say that, grassroots marketing, there's a huge opportunity for us on that front. I think for marketing to partner with sales more closely on and operations and to create a better experience throughout the buyer journey for everyone.
Yeah, I'm feeling horrible because we're about out of time here. I think I have to have you back on. I'd really like to spend more time talking about grassroots marketing. I think that, so I did a little math here. You got 19% professional referrals, and what was it, 47% friends and family, and that's 66%. Yeah. And I find myself wondering, how much time do you, and I'm going to ask this to the audience, how much time do you actually spend talking to your residents, your family members, of just asking the question, do you know somebody else who might be interested in moving into our community here? And I suspect there are people out there where they'd go, oh, I know my friend's parents are really looking. Maybe I should try to get them in. Such great opportunity. So, Jamison, anything last I'm missing here before we sign off?
I think we hit upon the key points. I would just say if people are curious about these topics, check out my LinkedIn profile. We've been publishing articles since the SMASH conference on the survey results and the panelist conversations. So check it out on there.
Cool. Thank you very much. Have a happy holiday. Thank you to Jada behind the scenes for making sure everything works. We will be back next Friday and the following Friday with 2 more great shows, and I am really looking forward to that. And Jamison, we will have to do a part 2 on this, I can tell, if you're willing.
Happy to do it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. See you next week.